Operation Gibraltar began as a hidden war in the mountains and valleys of Kashmir, but its consequences rolled outward toward the tank country of Punjab. In August 1965, Pakistan sent infiltrators across the ceasefire line in the hope that armed action would ignite unrest, disrupt Indian control, and alter the political balance before a full conventional war began. The plan belonged to a different kind of fighting from the armored clash that would later unfold at Asal Uttar, yet it was part of the same chain of escalation. It matters in a series about tank battles because many armored battles are decided long before the tanks meet. They are shaped by political assumptions, intelligence failures, geography, and the belief that one side can control the pace of a crisis. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. The background to Operation Gibraltar lay in the unresolved struggle over Jammu and Kashmir, a dispute that had remained dangerous since partition and the First India-Pakistan War. By 1965, Pakistan's leadership believed that India might be vulnerable, partly because India was still rebuilding confidence after the 1962 war with China, and partly because the earlier clashes in the run of Kutch seemed to suggest that pressure could be applied without triggering unlimited escalation. That reading was tempting, but it was also hazardous. A state can misjudge another state's caution as weakness, and a limited operation can become a ladder that both sides climb faster than expected. Gibraltar was designed as a way to avoid starting a declared war, but it rested on assumptions that war itself would soon test. Kashmir was not ideal country for large tank formations, and that is one reason Operation Gibraltar can seem, at first, distant from Asal Uttar. The region was defined by ridges, valleys, narrow tracts, forests, rivers, and settlements connected by vulnerable roads. In such country, a tank's speed and firepower could be far less useful than local knowledge, infantry endurance, artillery support, and control of passes. Movement could be slowed by weather, gradients, demolitions, and the simple fact that armies had to funnel through predictable routes. Yet Kashmir was strategically tied to the wider war because pressure there threatened communications and forced commanders to think beyond the immediate sector. A crisis in the hills could pull open the gates to battle on the plains. The operation itself was built around infiltration. Armed groups, including regular Pakistani soldiers operating in a regular fashion, moved across the ceasefire line in several sectors with missions that included sabotage, disruption, and encouragement of revolt. The hope was that these actions would blend into local resistance and create a crisis larger than the number of infiltrators themselves. In theory, this was a way to make a political effect without first committing divisions and armor in open battle. In practice, the plan depended on conditions that could not simply be ordered into existence. It required secrecy, reliable communications, supply in difficult terrain, sympathetic local response, and coordination between covert movement and conventional military readiness. If any of those pieces failed, the whole design became exposed. The local uprising that Pakistan expected did not materialize in the way the plan required. Indian authorities and military units received warnings, reports, and evidence that something larger than scattered unrest was underway. Villagers, police, and soldiers played roles in identifying suspicious movement, and once the pattern became clearer, Indian forces began countermeasures across the affected sectors. The conflict quickly became less hidden than its planners had intended. Instead of creating a political shock that paralyzed India, the infiltration gave India a clearer case for military response. That is one of the central ironies of Operation Gibraltar. A campaign meant to exploit ambiguity began to lose its advantage as the enemy understood its shape. As Indian forces reacted, the fighting along and across the ceasefire line intensified. Troops moved through difficult country, searched routes, fought for high ground, and tried to seal the paths by which infiltrators had entered. Indian operations in areas such as the approaches around Uri and the Hajipir region were meant not merely to chase scattered groups, but to attack the corridors that made infiltration possible. The campaign became a test of infantry, mountain movement, artillery coordination, and endurance rather than armor. It also became a test of political nerve. Each Indian move to cut off infiltration placed new pressure on Pakistan because a failed covert campaign could not easily be defended as a success at home or abroad. The hidden war was becoming an open military problem. The failure was not simply a matter of brave men meeting bad luck. It reflected a gap between political desire and operational reality. Infiltration can be powerful when it fits the social terrain, when the population supports it, when logistics are durable, and when the larger campaign plan is ready for the enemy's most likely response. Gibraltar overestimated the ease with which unrest could be triggered, and underestimated how quickly Indian forces might adapt. Many infiltrators faced isolation once their initial movement was detected, and scattered action could not substitute for a coherent battle plan. Communications and resupply were difficult, and the terrain that helped men hide also made it hard to sustain them. In war, concealment is not the same thing as control. The wider lesson is that irregular action and conventional maneuver must be joined by realistic strategy. Pakistan sought to create a political result through covert military pressure, but the plan did not solve the problem of what would happen if India refused to behave as predicted. Once India began to strike back and seize tactical opportunities, Pakistan faced a choice between accepting failure or escalating. This is where Operation Gibraltar connects directly to the armored war that followed. A plan intended to avoid full-scale combat helped produce conditions in which full-scale combat seemed increasingly necessary. Tanks were still mostly off-stage, but the logic of mechanized war was already approaching. If pressure in Kashmir could not be achieved by infiltration, Pakistan would look for a more direct blow. That direct blow would be aimed toward Akhnur, but before reaching Grand Slam, it is important to see how Gibraltar changed Indian thinking. Indian leaders and commanders could no longer treat the crisis as a series of isolated incidents. The infiltration suggested a deliberate campaign, and the fighting that followed showed that Pakistan was willing to push hard in Kashmir. India, therefore, had to consider whether fighting only on the ground chosen by Pakistan would leave it strategically trapped. A purely local response might defend a pass or a road, but still allow the enemy to set the rhythm of escalation. The idea of expanding the war across the international border in Punjab did not come from nowhere. It grew from the realization that the crisis could not be contained on Pakistan's preferred terms.
For soldiers on the ground, the experience was far removed from the clean arrows that later appear on campaign maps. Infiltration warfare created fear, confusion, and sudden violence among villages, patrol routes, and mountain tracks. Civilians faced suspicion and danger, while regular troops had to distinguish between rumor, local movement, and organized enemy action. Infantrymen climbed, searched, waited, and fought in country where a small group could delay a larger one, and where a single pass could matter more than a wide front. Artillery fire and small unit engagements did not carry the dramatic image of tank formations advancing across open fields, but they were part of the same war. The human cost began before the famous wrecked Pattons of Punjab entered the story.
Operation Gibraltar deserves attention because it reveals how battlefield myth can begin with strategic misunderstanding. Later memory often leaps to the visible climax: tanks burning in fields, commanders making stands, and a defensive box closing around an armored thrust. But the road to that climax passed through a failed attempt to make Kashmir erupt from within. The episode also reminds us that tanks are rarely the first cause of an armored battle. They are instruments, committed after leaders have already decided what they believe the enemy will do, what risks are acceptable, and how much time remains. By misreading those questions, Operation Gibraltar helped create the conditions in which larger formations, heavier weapons, and broader fronts would be brought into play. By the end of August 1965, the hidden campaign had not achieved the transformation its planners wanted. Instead of weakening India's hold through a controllable uprising, it had intensified Indian military action and forced Pakistan toward a more open response. That did not make Operation Gibraltar irrelevant. It made it decisive in a different way. It failed as a covert operation, but succeeded in pushing the crisis into a more dangerous stage. The next movement would be Operation Grand Slam, a conventional offensive toward Akhnur, where armor, artillery, infantry, and air power would enter the story with far greater force. Gibraltar's lesson is severe and lasting. A war begun in ambiguity can escape ambiguity quickly, and once it does, machines built for open battle may inherit the consequences.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.